Klug, and I'm Heather Klug. The title of our performance is the Seneca Falls Convention, Elevating the Debate for Women's Rights. May we begin?
You may.
On July 19th and 20th, 1848, over 300 men and women gathered in Seneca Falls, New York, and started the debate for women's rights. In 72 years, they would succeed in their struggle to gain women's right to vote, but even after 150 years, there is still a gap in equality between men and women.
At the time, it was considered a man's job to vote, own property, speak in public, and be involved in government. Having a convention that asked for women's rights was a rebellious and shocking action for activists to make, but it would forever change the roles of women in society.
In 1840, the World Anti-Slavery Convention was held in London. Elizabeth Stanton came with her husband, and Lucretia Mott was a delegate. When all the delegates arrived, the convention commenced.
All male delegates may take their seats, and women must wait in the gallery. The World's Anti-Slavery Convention is called to order.
But wait, this isn't fair! Women have just as much of a right as men to participate in this convention.
We are just as capable and respectable, and we would bring morals to this discussion.
Women need to stop letting men control their lives. This is preposterous. Something must be done.
This was how Elizabeth Stanton and Lucretia Mott first met and thought of holding a convention. In 1848, the New York Married Women's Property Act, which gave married women the right to own property, was passed. This successful act would give Elizabeth and Lucretia confidence in gaining women's rights.
The Seneca Falls Convention was held at the Wesleyan Chapel. The convention began at 10 a.m. and 40 men and 260 women attended. James Mott was chairman of the convention, for the women did not believe they were fit to lead. Lucretia Mott started by stating what the convention was for, who was speaking, and what they wanted to accomplish.
Then, Elizabeth Stanton read the Declaration of Sentiments, which was modeled after the Declaration of Independence, and concluded with her remarkable address to Seneca Falls.
I should feel exceedingly diffident to appear before you at this time, having never spoken in public. Were I not nerved by a sense of right and duty, did I not feel that the time had come for the question of women's wrongs to be laid before the public, did I not feel that woman herself must do this work? For a woman alone can understand the height, the depth, the length, and the breadth of her own degradation. Man cannot speak for her because he has been educated to believe that she differs from him so materially that he cannot judge her thoughts, feelings, and opinions by his own.
This speech was significant in affecting the number of men and women that would sign the Declaration of Sentiments, for it was considered appalling to change the words which were written by their founding fathers. The Declaration of Sentiments was thought to be a disgrace to women. The press called it the most shocking and unnatural incident recorded in the history of humanity. Also included in the Declaration of Sentiments were 12 resolutions for women's rights. The most hotly debated resolution was women's right to vote.
We have resolutions for the convention today.
Women can obtain positions of power, women are equal to men, women may give public speeches, women have the right to vote. Wait, what? This is outrageous. How can you ask for the right to vote? This will make the entire convention seem like a joke. You are sure to fail at getting any rights from women.
What's the matter?
She wants to request women's right to vote. How ridiculous!
I don't understand the big fuss he's making. Women's right to vote should be a reasonable request. It hasn't asked for it before. In 1776, Abigail Adams asked John Adams to remember the ladies when he was helping to create the new governments for the colonies. Her letter was unsuccessful, but this was a major step towards gaining recognition for women's rights. If we ask for the right to vote, we could possibly succeed. What's the harm in trying?
What you're saying is true, but Henry's right. People won't take us seriously. We must slowly convince the men and women of our country that women are worthy of being equal.
Even though her friends and family urged her to take out the Knights Resolution, Stanton persisted. The Knights Resolution was strongly debated among delegates, but it was eventually passed. The other 11 resolutions were unanimously passed.
At the end of the second day, 32 men and 68 women out of the delegates signed the Declaration of Sentiments, and the convention was ended. The public scoffed when they heard of the convention, for women gaining rights was an unreasonable idea at the time, and gaining the right to vote was outrageous.
The woman folk have just held a convention of New York and passed a sort of Bill of Rights, affirming it the right to vote, to become teachers, legislators, lawyers, and divines.
They should have resolved at the same time that it was obligatory for the lords aforesaid to wash dishes, don stockings, handle the broom, look beautiful, and be as fascinating as those blessed morsels of humanity whom God gave to preserve that rough animal man in something like reasonable society.
Conversations like these were the beginning of the anti-suffragist side of the argument, one of the two sides formed after the convention. The other side was the women's rights activists who had two main organizations. There was Lucy Stone's American Women's Suffrage Association and Elizabeth Cady Stanton's National Women's Suffrage Association, both formed in 1869. These groups were bitter rivals, for they did not agree on strategies to gain support for their cause.
Elizabeth Stanton's NWSA was bold compared to the AWSA. On November 18, 1872, Susan B. Anthony and other members of the NWSA voted in an official election in Rochester, New York, but as a result, they were arrested. Their actions showed that they're willing to fight for their rights.
Lucy Stone's AWSA took less drastic measures. They gave speeches, held assemblies, and published newspaper articles. The two groups merged to form the National American Women's Suffrage Association in 1890. This would strengthen their argument, and the NAWSA would campaign state by state to gain votes for women's suffrage.
During the women's rights movement, there were also many anti-suffragists. They formed one main organization called the National Association Opposed to Women's Suffrage, which was led by Josephine Dodge. They gave speeches, held assemblies around the country, and met with the legislature to provide their argument for why women should not have the right to vote.
Get your paper, Women's Journal, fight for women's suffrage, why not elect women? Get your paper, newspaper, newspaper. Thank you, newspaper, newspaper.
This is disgraceful. Women should never have the right to vote, never mind be elected. They'll lose their femininity.
Women's rightful place is in the home. She is responsible for the cleanliness of the home, the wholesomeness of the food, and the health of her children. She is responsible for their morals and their sense of truth and honesty. Without her full attention toward her home and children, things are surely to fall apart.
After many years of debate, women's rights activists started to make progress. In 1890, Wyoming became the first state to adopt an amendment that gave women suffrage. Many other western and central states would soon follow. And in 1920, the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, was passed and signed by Secretary of State Bainbridge Colby.
I congratulate the women of the country on the successful culmination of their efforts, which have been sustained in the face of many discouragements. Now, therefore, be it known that I, Bainbridge Colby, Secretary of State of the United States, hereby certify the amendment aforesaid has become valid to all intents and purposes as part of the Constitution of the United States.
As women gained the right to vote, they became involved in government. In 1917, Jeannette Rankin was the first woman elected into a national political office. Women's views in government were generally different from men's, and they provided a moral compass. Women were most likely to be against certain actions, such as war, whereas men were for it.
Women gaining the right to vote also impacted who was elected and what types of laws were passed. In 1912, Woodrow Wilson was elected, largely because women in western states already had the right to vote. Woodrow Wilson promised not to go into World War I, and this gained many women's votes.
Women's votes also played a major role in enacting prohibition. When the 18th Amendment was proposed, almost 3/4 of the United States already allowed women to vote. Most women voted for prohibition because in 1874, the Women's Christian Temperance Union linked alcohol to being the main cause of domestic abuse, which was very common at the time.
Before the Seneca Falls Convention, women almost never received an education. Men believed that women were too delicate or incapable of learning large amounts of information. This meant that they could not pursue careers, such as being a lawyer or a doctor. After the Seneca Falls Convention, many colleges and universities started to open their doors to women. This allowed them to do work that was considered a man's job and allowed them to better support their families.
Even though the Seneca Falls debate was over a century ago, it has had a lasting impact on the United States. The NAWSA still has meetings today to bring women closer to reaching equality. Today, 57% of college students are women, yet they only make 77% of the wage of a male counterpart. Clearly, there's some more work to do.
The women's rights movement would not have started without the Seneca Falls Convention. This long debate has led to women gaining the right to vote, speak in public, sue others, own property, have an education, be elected, and choose jobs outside of their homes. The Seneca Falls Convention has empowered women and forever changed their roles in society. Thank you.